Greetings, this is I, Dracovin, your Lord and Emperor, here at the Dracovin Empire, and welcome one and all. I hope you're having a great day and you're ready to talk about some tabletop. Whether you, of course, are joining me over there live on Twitch or you're joining me later on YouTube, hey everybody, it's a wonderful day to be talking about 4th edition D&D Dark Sun. Well, Dark Sun more than anything, but honestly speaking, I'm focusing more on the 4E version of it, because it is the most up-to-date version of it than the 2nd version. We'll get into it, though. But if you're here, of course, remember, you can always shout out yourself over there, as long as it's within topic. Or if you're over on YouTube, remember, like, the YouTube stuff you always have to do, like, comment, subscribe, ring bell, all that stuff. Anyway, so, yes, in Dark Sun, if you've played, have you been to Draj? That's the question for today, because Draj is an unusual city in the fact that it is very xenophobic, separated from a lot of the other city-states. It's also a very warlike city-state. It's also very much so like when we talk about the general idea of Dark Sun, Draj kind of talks about it in that way, kind of hits on it. So there's a lot of details about it that make it a very interesting one to speak about. And we're going to get into it in a minute here, but, I want to kind of give that kind of opening to everything here. And I will say, before we dive into it, and I throw all the images up here too, I'm using a lot of 2nd edition images of Draj here, and they probably fall under a certain interesting line culturally. I will say that they're not, it's just, we'll get to it, but you'll see the images there. It's an interesting fact that Draj, as a city, has a different feeling than a lot of the others, especially the old art style. It puts it very Mesoamerican, like Incan, Aztec, Mayan in its style, which is kind of unique because you don't see a lot of that art style in a lot of other places within Dark Sun. Now, granted, Dark Sun doesn't really have a certain look to it anyway. It's very desert dwelling, it could be Middle Eastern, it could be Northern African, it could be a little bit of areas where there's like a lot of desolation areas. And something like this, which stands out as unique amongst it, is interesting because it isn't necessarily a desert-type style. It's more a jungle style, traditionally. The jungles of Central and Northern South America, granted the Incas are a little different, but like the Mayans and Aztecs, who kind of traditionally kind of go that, but I guess Mexico has its deserts too. We don't really see artistic styles. I mean, pyramids and the Aztecs were in jungles a lot of times. Anyway, I'm just talking about that here because it's an interesting thing that is displayed in the 2nd edition art style for it, and I'll be using the images from that because there aren't a lot of images of Draj in general. So, let's get into it, though, with a good place to start, which is I'm going to shout out the book that I'm using 99% of with today. Most of what I'm talking about is this book. It is, of course, the Dark Sun Campaign Settings book from 4th edition. It's great. It gives you a very precise, updated version of Dark Sun from a lot of the older material, cuts out a lot of the stuff. Certainly speaking, it doesn't shy away from a lot of the darker aspects of Dark Sun, but again, there are some interesting aspects that they don't really talk about, which might just be, there are sensitive things that even Dark Sun as a dark campaign they might have gotten rid of in 4th edition, which I'm curious about. That's a thing that's not a today thing. That's a maybe in the future thing to consider and discuss. But so yeah, here is an image from 2nd edition of Draj as a city. As I said, it does have a, generally speaking, a little bit of a Mesoamerican feel in some of the way things are designed to. It isn't a one-for-one design, but it does have it here, interestingly enough. So what can we say about Draj? It's known as the City of Moons. It's actually considered a backwater city-state. Its Sorcerer King controls it utterly 100% and is best described as bad. Draj is also a place that isn't for those that love peace. It's all about warfare, conflict, and these things are its highest ideals. Save for the Templars, the priests of this place, warriors hold power. and their status is something to aspire to within Draj. If they aren't warring against their neighbors like Ram, or defending their homes from reprisals or conquest from others, they're raiding the surrounding wastes, plundering for slaves, fresh ones to replace those extended in labor or sacrifice, which we'll talk about. So, everything links back to its Sorcerer King. I'm going to butcher this name. Tektuk Itali. Tektuk Title. Tektuk Title. And I think Tektuk Title. Again, it sounds very, I don't know if it would be real, but look, I played Civ 6, played the Aztecs. Tenochtitlan as the name of their capital. Kind of feels like that kind of style. Even if it's something made up, it's in a style. But I'm going to keep butchering his name. Tektuk Title, the father of life, basically preserves, is everywhere in the city-state. His visage adorns the walls, buildings, his symbols on banners, his Templars, who are known as moon priests, are everywhere, enforcing laws, instructing people as perfect divinity. In the eyes of people of Draj, Tektuk Title is a god. And no one would suggest it, but if you would see his image and you're not from here, he does not look majestic at all. Tektuk Title has narrow eyes, a wide nose, heavy jowls, round, pouty lips. Other regal images that they show around the city are feather serpents that he has on banners, carried by soldiers of war. The Jasun, or ambush drakes, have a place of prominence here. So, Tektuk Title's influence is so insidious that basically very few Draj would ever question his divinity, or doubt the deeds attributed to him, or disobey his commands given by him or him through his moon priests. Especially not anywhere where anybody that would, care to hear of this thing. So all citizens know that dissent invites the Sorcerer King's ire, and his anger can only be quelled through blood sacrifice. Alright, now we're going to take a quick look at the city statistics, and we're going to take a look at this map. And I'm going to see if you can see my mouse cursor here. I'm circling up here in the corner, right next to me here. That's where Draj is. And this is the tier region where all the city-states are. So Draj is just right up here. I hope you can see the circling. I'm going to circle a little larger. Over near Dry Marsh. That's its location. There's the other one I mentioned. Nearby. So, it does command a landscape for miles around the city. And a population of about 18,000 people live in Draj. There is more population than this, but those are slaves, guards, and the surrounding fields mostly. Humans are about half the populations, elves and dwarves are the largest minorities, and many dwarfs end up as slaves in the fields here. There are a few moles, halflings, thride queens, and others that do round out the populace. Now, the location of Draj is interesting, because it's in mudflats. And those boggy mudflats that surround Drab make very little usable water for people. Now, those mudflats are great for growing agriculture. We'll talk about it, but not for people. Now, there are deep wells in the area where most of the city is. The Gift, talk about the Gift. That do tap into the water table. So there are some wells that give water. And if you're living in the Gift, where the most citizens live, yeah, most citizens that aren't slaves in the fields. Now, yeah, as I mentioned, right now, what is Drab known for? Draj is an agricultural center. It has grain and hemp fields that can feed the city-state many times over. Turns out those mudflats it's built on are great for producing a lot of food. They also have textiles like cottons, linens, and silks that they are major exporters of. And their distance from Tyr, though, does mean that there are some commodities, especially metal, that are very hard to acquire. Tyr is over near the mountains, and they can get some metal. Here, not a lot of it. Now, what makes up for in that kind of thing is the defense the city-state has, because it has an enormous military. There are 500 Joshuan knights that make up the core of their defense, and they receive support from another 3,000 lesser warriors, who haven't reached the title of knighthood. And if so, the moon priests can press the slaves into service if they feel a need to, which then requires there be, getting some back, but, yeah. Now, if we talk about inns and taverns, I will briefly mention it here because Draj is incredibly unfriendly to travelers. If you're traveling to there, you're not going to get a lot of things that are very nice. The few inns and few taverns that are there are mostly accommodations run by House Salax. I'm going to try not to butcher these words too much. Which caters to caravans and stands near the Golden Moon Gate. So basically, people that are doing trade are most of the time you're going to find inns and taverns for. Though again, it doesn't mean there aren't a few others, just that outsiders aren't really dealing with them. Now, let's take a look at this image here, because the person in the center, as far as I've been able to tell from other art pictures of him that exist, is supposed to be our good friend here, the Sorcerer King, Title. Right in the center between a moon priest and a warrior. So, power structure is clan-based in Draj. A group of related families that practice the same trade or craft. Most Draj are raised to follow in the footsteps of the forebears of their clans. Each clan is assigned a portion of fields that surround Draj. A share of slaves taking the raids of other city-states go to those fields to help care for them. And the most prestigious clans receive better plots in fields and hold more slaves. And whether they believe or not that Title is a divine being, almost all Drab embrace him as their ruler and count his presence as a boon to them. The Father of Life delegates most of the city-state's administrations to his Templars, the Moon Knights, which we'll talk about in a minute here. The elite warrior caste of the Joshuan Knights support the Templars. And all other residents of the city-state are merchants, artisans, or slaves. So if you're not a merchant, you're not an artisan, you're not a warrior, you're not a Joshuan Knight, you're not a moon priest, you're a slave. You fit in one of these few categories. The story that his moon priests will tell is the moons Raul and Guthe pitied the world and gave them their son, a god in mortal flesh named Title. The god led his chosen people out of suffering into a new home. With a word, he repaired the lands, turning the sand to soil and bringing forth lush growth. With the sweep of his hands, he raised a city to give them shelter to these followers. His work complete, Title made ready to depart. But the mortals beseeched him to stay and protect them from jealous enemies who would claim his gifts for themselves. The Father of Life consented, and his people built a palace for him that he would dwell forever. So he is no god, but this is his godly story. He is a Sorcerer King, a very powerful being, nigh immortal, and in generally speaking, if you compare it to most Sorcerer Kings, kind of middling one at best. Petty, spiteful, ravenous for power, not content with what he holds, constantly looking to the west, probing his rivals' lands for defenses and weaknesses. He can send forth his legions to expand his empire. Yeah. He is... yeah. Just... if it wasn't for his, power as a Sorcerer King, even though he's very mid as a Sorcerer King, yeah, he still is a threat. Now the Templars, his moon priests, they're part bureaucrat, part warrior, part religious police. They use fear and propaganda to ensure Title's reign continues. They control the population, and observe a bewildering variety of rites and celebrations throughout the year. They teach the people of Draj that bountiful harvests will continue as long as Titlay and the moons are pleased. And just like Templars of other city-states, they have a hierarchy. Lessers oversee fields and slaves. Higher rankings attend to the Sorcerer King with all the luxury and excess that their position carries. And then, of course, we turn to the Jesuit Knights, who are related to the craftsmen and merchants. Talk about that as we talk about them. Because strength and ruthlessness are the qualities that the people of Draj, as a whole, personify as great. And these warriors are the ultimate personification of that. They are named, of course, for the drakes. Titlay's beloved pet drakes, Joshuans. Hence they're Joshua Knights, and embody the principles of that. They're warriors born into one of the city's heroic clans, descendants of the great heroes of long of old. And unlike the nobles of other city-states, they aren't necessarily wealthy landowners. The riches come from membership in the foremost clans, and they're trained as war. Each also claims allegiances of certain artisan and merchant clans. Here's where the clans are interconnected. Basically, if you're from a merchant or artisan clan, you will be kind of related to a Jesuit Knight clan. And warriors of these lower clans are bound to the Jesuits and fight under their command. So it's basically you're bound to them, related to them, kind of connected to them, so you will have some warriors in your merchant and artisan groups too, and they will be, so very direct descendants are following the footsteps, and maybe other sons will become warriors and follow the Jesuits, and maybe see the glory to your clans. Glory to your clan. Let's take a look at Draj, and here is a map of it. I'm not going to go over everything on this, but I'm going to talk about the city as a whole here for a second, and then we'll get into the various sections of the city a little bit before we finish up today. So, Draj doesn't have a very large population in comparison to most city-states, but only the city-state of Ram, their rival, basically rivals the size Draj sprawls into. It commands the easternmost extent of this entire tier region, and controls the old road of kings that curls east and northward to the legendary lands and the world's edge beyond. These mudflats go on for miles and are what give this place their strength and resources. Talk about what they get. That the slaves get your hemp, wheat, and that the Moon Prince are just watching over them every day. Causeways of stone cuts through the muddy flats, muddy fields, and brackish ponds. And along this narrow path travels House Salaxis Merchant Caravan, one of the major merchant houses. Probably the largest merchant house in the entire area. Not the only merchant house, mind you, but the largest. They have caravans laden with flour, rope, textiles, other goods, and basically, if you're looking at any mercantile clans, they are the one. There are smaller ones within Draj, but they are just in their shadows. Things like the Elven Market of Draj, which has a bunch of shabby little tents and booths along the causeway, and this ancient stone road cuts through the fields until it comes to the outer city, which is called the Gift. There are no walls protecting the Gift, unlike a lot of other city-states that have the entire region protected. That's not a wall protecting it on that map there that you're seeing. It's a muddy ditch filled with sharpened stakes and vermin. I'll talk a little bit more about it in a second. Javelin armed guards patrol the perimeter of this moat, and the only route is a stone bridge across that its footings sink deep into the mud. So you'd have to cross through spikes, vermin, mud, and javelineers shooting at you if you try to invade across there. It's awful to cross there. That's why you named the bridge. So the Gift is a lively community that fills the space between the ditch and, of course, the 60-foot walls that are the inner city known as the Two Moon City. The roads wend through the clay buildings and are stacked almost on top of each other like children's blocks. Wooden head ladders offer access to upper stories and roofs. There are public squares here and there with great wells. and fat around grain silos around, keeping food. Again, they are incredibly well fed here. Water, mixed bag. Food, got a shit ton of it here. Especially greens. The Golden Moon Gate is the only passage from the gift into the Two Moon City. And then you enter into Titlay's inner domain. And of course, the first sight you're going to see when you get there is the Father and Master Temple. A step pyramid that commands the entire city-state. It's the peak. At its peak is the god's altar, where Titlay sacrifices slaves, dissidents, and enemy soldiers by tearing out their hearts and disguising their corpses to the arena hundreds of feet below. Channels cut into the pyramid's side carry blood down to ground level into the compound. And on days of sacrifice, crimson streams trickle through the inner city. Hence why on this map, it is very red in the inner city. Let's go into a little bit of detail about these regions before we finish up today. I'll get one more kind of map of the temple there as we talk about it. So the Fields of Plenty. They're mud flats. They are segregated into different fields, and each of those fields is different in what they raise, what kind of grain or hemp they produce, and it's a system that allows them to manage crops more efficiently. And basically it's like, oh, these people, this field with these slaves are raising this. Also keeps the laborers under control a little bit more. Each plot has a small encampment that includes a barn, a granary, a barracks for the slaves, a communal meal hall, and an altar dedicated to the great god himself, Titlay. And the moon priests and overseers from the clans that are in control of there basically look over, patrol the plot and of its borders, monitor the work, and keep the slaves docile. The Road of Kings becomes, within the Field of Plenty, the Avenue of Conquest, which leads to the city. And there is a house, Taslak's compound, outside the city. It was on the map I was showing there, which they have one just basically grounds with lax guards, but powerful magic protections, where they basically can run things right outside the city for their trade routes that they send other households. So that's why they have it there as the major trade house that comes from Draj. They need some connections to the outside world, and they're sending things in and out. Now we've returned once more to the gift, which I talked about. And some of the vermin within the moat, the big area there, are Calopises, large psionic centipedes. Yay! Now the gift is vulnerable, but it's also crowded. And most citizens call it home. It's a tangled mess, narrow, twisted streets, small, squat brick mud homes that sometimes sit stacked on top of each other, that are climbing wood or rope ladders to the upper levels where maybe you live. Small square windows allow some breeze, but many families spend their evenings on their home's flat roofs. Basically, because it's cooler than squeezing into the building. Now, I did want to mention the three things that you will find in the gift here, because they're very interesting. First is the Flower Warfield, which is in front of the Golden Moon Gate, and has annual contests called the Flower War, where warriors from the clans of all over the gift, basically remember, these are lesser clans, basically show up in full battle regalia, as colorful as blossoms as they trample, and fight each other in free-for-alls, duels, and team matches, pounding their rivals with stone clubs. The best might win a place among Jesuit Knights. Basically, you might be upgraded from your lower clan into something higher. The worst, you might fame shame or exile, or honestly dead in a ditch somewhere. So yeah. Then, of course, you've got the Bountiful Market. It's in one of the open-air areas, and it's one of the areas that you will actually find foreigners, as far as they can go into Draj, without permission from Moon Priests. If you go any deeper than the Bountiful Markets, you will need permission from the Moon Priests to enter. It's a bizarre position at the end of the Avenue of Conquest, hosting traders and vendors from all over the world. Established merchant helps keep the emporiums and warehouses along the market edge. Grains and textiles are dominant here, but there's also a growing pottery market. And then, of course, it is also important to note there's the House of the Mind, which is a psionic institute, the most preeminent one in the Tyr region. And students from all over the 7 cities come to study at the academy, which is led by the headmaster, Ixtable the Blind. And Titme takes pride that the House of the Mind is here and has an interest in their affair. So he's like, our city is the best in the entire region. Of course, we have this place where everybody that's psionic would learn from. Of course. It's a problem. Now we travel into Two Moon City. The 60-foot wall here protects it, of course, with its only door being the Golden Moon Gate. The only people that pass into this area are his best warriors, most loyal priests, and his most valuable treasure. Basically, at the edge of a red brick plaza is the Golden Moon Gate, and its massive wooden doors inlaid with silver trackery and glittering obsidian. The Jeshi Knights monitor the gate, and slaves spent hours opening and hours polishing and scrubbing them to maintain an impressive appearance. Beyond is the Avenue of Moons, a long, dark tunnel that runs to the Palace of Gladiatorial Combat, where gladiators are paraded before their matches and encircles the Father and Master Temple. Then we have the temples of Ral and Guthe, the moon temples, basically, which are dwarfed by the Father and Master Temple, but are still beautiful. They're on either side of the entranceway, the entrance to the Two Moon City. They're lavish shrines where citizens make offers to the moon gods and beseech their blessings. And they also serve as the main barracks of the moon priests. There's also the Royal Menagerie, which Title likes to collect creatures and has stabled them in large places in the Two Moon City. And these specimens range from curious to horrific. He has breeding pens. The Joshuan breeding pens are his most special pride. He basically wants to replenish the fierce ambush drakes that once hunted the fields of plenty. On occasion, though, he will actually order the Moon Priest to turn certain creatures loose in the streets, and anybody basically sad enough to encounter them is just another sacrifice. And then you have the Palace of Gladiatorial Combat. The arena is a grand amphitheater-style coliseum with spacious floor. Title's appearance is everywhere in bas-reliefs, friezes that capture him as the most celebrated achievements. Residents can observe the games from comfortable balcony seats. Hector Title has a habit of discarding slaves, functionaries, and anyone who displeases him from the heights of his temple, which abuts the arena. Falling bodies splat and break as they smash the arena floor, and the statuette Sorcerer King forbids the moon priests from removing the corpses. The broken remains serve as a reminder of his power. So, yeah. Finally, the last thing to talk about is our good friend, the Father and Master Temple a little bit more. It's about 300 feet tall. It's an enormous step pyramid that is both palace and treasury to Title. The altar that crowns it, where he does his sacrifices, is, the thing you notice most. There are 20 levels between ground floor and its peak. Lower levels hold administrative offices and the Sorcerer King's throne. Barracks, slave quarters, kitchens, and storage chambers fill the middle, and upper floors are residence of Title, his concubines, his many children, the vaults in his highest layers of the Sorcerer King's treasures, protected by bitter curses and magic wards. There you go. That's Draj. Interesting city-state, because a lot of when you talk about Dark Sun, exemplifies what Dark Sun is Draj. Certainly speaking, it isn't the actual true example of it. But a lot of, we have a terrible Sorcerer King in our charge who basically has us worship him as a god, a lot of people are mistreated, mass amount of conquest, slave culture, all these kind of things that exist here in its most raw form of what is described as the basically dingy, dirty, dark setting of Dark Sun is exemplified in Draj to a degree. It makes it an interesting place to talk about. And certainly speaking, even as I, talk about it now, you can tell that it does have this, again, very Aztecian, Mesoamerican feel to it. And the art, they don't really have an artwork of Draj in the 4th edition book. I really haven't seen it. But the language and basically what they talk about kind of hints that if you would see the art from 2nd edition, you can see what it is there. Which, again, is an interesting fact, that they have a very unique something that we can compare to our cultures. And again, it's one of those things that there isn't a lot of that in Athas necessarily. Athos is such a unique setting, and there's so much things there that certainly there can be these little comparisons, and some of the interesting ideas that are sparked there could have inspiration in some ways. But I think what we really have to talk about is inspiration in the writers of the original place, in the original creators here. And you can kind of see that inspiration still seen from all the stuff I talk about. It's not necessarily gone, but it's different, evolved. Certainly I feel like it's not as exact as it was probably in the second edition. Again, of the city-states where you can see things that are going on, I will have to talk about the other 4, certainly before the end of all this, which will kind of, which I might talk about some other stuff in Athas before I finish my guide to it, basically. But it is an interesting one to speak about in the 7 city-states. Maybe not because there's anything particularly that stands out as unique or interesting, but because it is so Athas. I think that's, again, what I was trying to say earlier. It is just so Athas. Tyr's an interesting place. Balk's an interesting place. A lot of the other cities are interesting places for various unique aspects to them. But that kind of general speaking, what is Athas? Draj is that to a degree. It doesn't really stand out in comparison to many of its neighbors. In a sense of beyond what is the average of a city-state and what a Sorcerer King is, but it does have these little bits, if you really dive into it, which do make it unique and interesting. I think that's the other thing, too, is I'm not passing it off as not being unique and interesting, because it is, too. Draj, it's probably one of the places that I would say are least likely for me, as me thinking as a dungeon master, a person running the game, to center an adventure around. Not impossible, pretty difficult, just because of the nature of the city. Just because of the level of xenophobia, the level of, very powerful control of Titla. It's interesting. But I'll leave it there. I could definitely go into a little bit more of the discussion here, and it probably would lead me into more stuff in Athens, so that's for another day. I hope you enjoyed this here. I will definitely do more of these videos in the future. Make sure to check those out. I at least want to finish the 7 city-states. Make sure to check those out. I do other stuff where I, of course, stream it live on Twitch, and it goes up on YouTube a couple days later. If you're looking to catch me live, it's in the afternoons, usually early to mid-afternoon. Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, with Saturdays a bonus day. Usually Friday's a little earlier, same with Saturday. I, of course, do other tabletop-related stuff, discussing tabletopics on Saturday, 6 p.m. We talk about news of the week, and really dive into deeper discussion topics that are very interesting. Make sure to check that out. And, of course, Crimson Queen is a Pathfinder First Edition live show that I do on Wednesday evenings at 9 p.m. Currently my only live show. Make sure to check that out. It's free. I also have old videos of various other live tabletop stream games you can always check out. All the tabletop stuff goes up on YouTube. I either do other gaming stuff on Twitch. And then I've got Discord and Twitter.com. Link below for social media stuff. Alright. I hope everybody had a good day. I hope everybody enjoyed learning about Draj and diving into this place which, on the surface, is very general, but as you dive deep, has interesting aspects about it that make it unique. And I think that's the thing is that the surface level, if you just look at it, is very one note, but diving deep, you get those extra notes. Anyway, until next time we chat, Dark Sun, something other tabletop, I bid all of you out there a deep and wonderful. Farewell.